let's just do a demo now. So we're going to go to a clip. We're going to take a 30-second clip of this podcast and use Camb AI to convert it to Mandarin for the viewers to hear it right here, right now. All right, here it goes.
我相信苹果公司多年来一直是技术领域的领导者，然而，他们对自己在人工智能方面的工作并不十分公开。我不认为他们会在这方面更加公开。在人工智能时代，一个公司越是封闭，人们就越会认为他们落后。如果这种看法持续很长时间，它可能会成为现实。
有趣，是的，在历史上，苹果公司一直对他们的工作非常保密，
是的，
而且很有趣。
Did you clear your cash flow?
All right, we're live. Ack, thanks for coming on. You have a AI product, Camb AI, which essentially dubs your content in every language. So we're going to do an example here later in this episode of us speaking in Mandarin, but the whole visuals and everything. Really excited to see that. But yeah, thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian, for having me on. I've been watching your podcast, and it's great to be on one now. I don't know. I think I could kick it off by maybe talking a little bit about what Camb AI is and a little bit about my background. So at Camb AI, we're essentially developing the world's most powerful zero-shot dubbing AI. I think it's kind of our thesis that a lot of the modern world / internet was developed with English speakers in mind. And we're kind of redesigning it for the world as of today. And in doing so, it kind of builds on the years of research that I and the rest of the team have been doing in speech and language. We've created 2 foundational models, and in speech and translation. And on top of that, now we've built this AI layer that offers kind of a very dynamic ability to dub any kind of video into multiple languages with a specific focus on some of the most lowest resource languages, so ones that don't have a lot of data digitally.
So talk about that a little bit. You were saying like Malayalam is a Southern Indian language, and we were talking about some other languages that I haven't heard of before. So I can imagine that there's not a lot of, like, as you're saying, lower resource languages, meaning there's not a lot of content on the internet, whether it's text or video content in those languages.
Right. So it's actually, the way I would want to define it for myself, or the context of this talk, is a lower resource language not necessarily isn't spoken by fewer people. Like Malayalam is spoken by a lot of people. But it is true that perhaps it does not have as much digital data as something like Spanish would. Now, the problem that has existed is that more and more content, as it has been developed in languages like English that are higher resource, that have a lot of digital data on the internet, speakers or not so fluent speakers of English and people who don't speak the language at all often miss out in a lot of things that are developed in English. So, high quality education, health, sports, entertainment, but that's just like kind of the tip of the iceberg. And it's just kind of a problem that keeps growing when you think about it, right? There's more and more data in one particular language, and then there's more content in that language. So that grows, but the one that doesn't have any data just never has any data. And so the problem that we really want to fix is, how do you take content in a high resource language and convert it to low resource language, which is a pretty fundamental problem that not many classical models can solve. Well, of course, there's some open source research ongoing. Some of the big tech is also focusing on, making technology and the kind of digital age more inclusive, but there's not really something that just does it. And with Camb AI, we're hoping that with some of these foundational models that we're creating that focus on this transfer of high resource to low resource, we can provide essentially a backbone on which a lot of creators, enterprises, and general internet users can watch content or consume any kind of content in their preferred language, and really, really democratize and build an internet that's for everybody and not for somebody who speaks a particular language or doesn't. So that's kind of in a nutshell the real focus, and our research has really focused on a high resource to low resource, because traditionally, it's easy to get from English to Spanish, both being very high resource, like models like even like a Google Translate or a GPT today can do that really well, but will struggle really hard on some of the lower resource languages.
Interesting. Yeah, because I use, Google Translate all the time for different things, and it, typically works pretty well, but I can't say that I've ever tried to translate, Malayalam or like you said, as a lower resource language. Typically it's like German, French, Spanish,
Right.
Something like that, maybe Hindi,
Right.
something that's pretty, way more common.
Right.
Interesting.
So-
Oh, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, the thing there is like, there is in video dubbing, for example, which we're focused on, which kind of our technology is focusing more and more. Even when you get to something like high resource, like a Spanish or a Hindi, a Google Translate sentence by sentence might do really well. But it's interesting that you bring that up, because let's talk about this podcast, which I guess we're going to attempt to, repurpose a clip of in Mandarin. But the English you and I are speaking is not necessarily English that is easily translatable. While talking, of course, we understand each other perfectly. But if somebody was to, I guess, transcribe out this podcast and try to read it, there would be a lot of broken sentences, half thoughts, coming back to things. And, if you naively try to translate that, it's actually very hard. Even something like a Google Translate or a GPT today, even if you try to do it in a higher resource language, it'll just come up with garbage. And that's not even to talk about things like idioms that we use or, things like those. So there's very kind of interesting problems even within high resource languages that some of the foundational models at Camb AI are able to solve. So it's not just we're not just serving kind of low resource languages, but it's kind of thinking about fundamentally what it takes to convert meaning in one language to the other in a way that classical like NMT models, as we call them, cannot handle.
Interesting. Yeah, so let's just do a demo now. So we're going to go to a clip. We're going to take a 30-second clip of this podcast and use Camb AI to convert it to Mandarin for the viewers to hear it right here, right now. All right, here it goes.
我相信苹果公司多年来一直是技术领域的领导者，然而，他们对自己在人工智能方面的工作并不十分公开。我不认为他们会在这方面更加公开。在人工智能时代，一个公司越是封闭，人们就越会认为他们落后。如果这种看法持续很长时间，它可能会成为现实。
有趣，是的，在历史上，苹果公司一直对他们的工作非常保密，
是的，
而且很有趣。人们对落后的看法，即使他们实际上并没有落后，也会导致他们落后，因为他们不相信自己领先。
正是如此。
Cindy, thanks so much for coming on. We just went through the two clips. We went through the English version of the clip and then the Mandarin version of the clip. So for the listeners, Cindy is a friend of mine, and she is a native Mandarin speaker born in China, lives here in Philadelphia now. Cindy, I would love to get your perspective on what you just heard and the quality of that translation that we just listened to.
Thanks, Brian, for inviting me to hear this translation. Overall, I think it did a good job. I understand, especially your partner. When he speak Mandarin is quite clear. And for your part is I didn't get 100% at the first time. So I replayed the second time, third time, and I totally understand after 3 times. I feel some word didn't really translate or pronounce very well. For example, I know you guys talk about Apple company, right? But when Apple translate English, it's 苹果. So when you have accent to speak 苹果, so it's hard for the consumer understand.
Did it try to translate like the word apple? Did it try to translate it like the fruit apple, or like how did it do that? Like
it's the same word, like a fruit apple, same word, but just like it maybe just I just feel the pronunciation is not quite standard, so it's kind of hard to pick up like in the first time. Also, there's a word like 落后. So I think translate English will be like far behind. I didn't understand the translation. So after like 2 or 3 times when I play the clip, so I got it. I kind of understand. So yeah, I will say overall the software did good job. I will give a 70. If you ask me to score it, I will say 70. And just some words pronunciation need improve. And I also can see the flow, is good. And a very, very good thing for me is, is from your voice, so the translation from your voice. So I think that's really, really amazing part. Feels like you speak, Mandarin and then with accent. So I feel that's really cool. But if you use another way to think, if you speak really, really good Mandarin, probably people feel like weird, So I will say that, the software, will be okay, have some accent, just maybe some words, they can improve the pronunciation. Yeah.
Awesome. That's really good info about it. And I'm curious too, like in China, like if somebody's talking about the company Apple, would they say like the English word, since it's a noun, would they like call it the English word apple, or would they actually translate the word apple into Mandarin when they talk?
Very good question. They will translate it in Mandarin. Apple say 苹果. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Well, thanks so much. It's so awesome to have you come on here and talk about what your thoughts are and give feedback. I really appreciate your time today, Cindy.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. It's very nice to share my thoughts. Yeah.
All right, man. So that's pretty cool. Obviously I brushed up on my Mandarin here for this episode, so you can see that I'm speaking fluent Mandarin. Right. Just kidding. This is the result of Camb AI. So walk us through like that clip that we just listened to. What was happening there? Can you tell us kind of the gist of it?
Yeah, perfect. So Brian, one of the things we have really focused on is making this technology applicable to a wide variety of applications. And now some of the traditional AI dubbing or whoever's tried to tackle this problem, to do it really well, you need a lot of data for a particular speaker to clone their voice well, even in one language, the language that they're speaking. And it's an even harder problem to transfer that cross-lingually to another language. So as you saw, even with a few seconds of us just speaking, the AI was able to completely differentiate voices, pick up and not only clone your voice, I guess, understand your speaking style, but do it in a completely different language that you don't even speak. So this is what we refer to as zero-shot cross-lingual cloning. And we have one foundational model that Camb AI is building upon. Why this is super important, it kind of piggybacks off of the low resource problem, right? Low data. It's important because when you think about practical scenarios, say you're talking about a movie or some kind of general video, or let's say there's a YouTuber that's doing an interview, but 3 people come in and start talking as well. To be able to handle such scenarios, you need a general enough AI model that can understand different speakers, one, and also be able to understand speaker identity given very less data. So let's say there was a movie that only had 2 actors. Maybe you could make a claim that, okay, we're going to scrape all the data of those actors and train it over weeks and then have them speak multiple languages. That's possible. And there has been enough research on that to make that possible. However, in a movie, there's more than two actors. At any point, somebody could be screaming in the background. A third background actor could come in, or maybe a barista could be giving you coffee. She says hi. To be able to handle all this, you need to be able to create technology that works off of very low data. So that's what we mean by zero shot. And yeah, with just maybe 10 to 15 seconds, our AI is able to figure out the speaker identity and convert it into, any language. In fact, it is getting so good that even if you were to invent a new language tomorrow, we could have you speak that language. So it's very agnostic to the actual language being converted into, which makes it even more versatile.
What was the Star Trek language? It was like the Klingon or something. Could you guys translate that?
I think the goal is that, Camb AI's goal is that eventually whatever language there is, we should and would want to be able to translate into. So of course, right now we do around 75 languages, but our goal is to get to 200, 300, any language that is the lowest of the low resource, help everybody come onto the internet. So yeah, I mean, if people start picking up the Star Trek language, it would be our moral duty to get on it and make sure it's possible for a platform and AI.
Let's dive into the tech on this, man. So what are you guys, like, what's under the hood? Are you guys building your own models? Are you using like some open AI stuff? How does the tech work on your platform?
Yeah, so I think naively, when you think about this, if you go to any master student or PhD or even an undergrad or really anybody who tinkers with technology, it would be easily understandable for them to imagine how a system like this should work, right? You have speech in one language, you could transcribe it, then you have text in that language, then you translate it, and then you voice it over again, right? So that is like a naive way to do it. And the problem is that every stage of that transfer of information or conversion of information type, in my mind, and I guess this would be true for anybody if you ask them, it's kind of information loss at each point, right? It's kind of like if you rub two things together, the heat goes away as loss. And what Camb AI attempts to do is prevent this kind of lossy conversion. We, with our foundational models, we're able to preserve context a lot better. So let's say there's multiple speakers, they're speaking idiomatically, they're saying just a lot of stuff which might not even make sense when written down and read out of context, right? So yes, we are creating our own foundational models. One is in colloquial translation, and the other is the zero-shot prosodic voice cloning mechanism. So these are our two foundational models. And kind of around this, we're using, again, proprietary techniques, but less AI, more algorithmic kind of thinking. One of the things that there has been significant research in this space of AI dubbing or multiple language conversion, etc. A new technique that's coming out very soon that we are also looking into and rapidly investigating and growing our AI in is speech to speech. So you don't need to convert a speech to text, a text to text, and then a text to speech. You can.
Is that what you're doing now? You're going through that whole like cycle of voice to text.
So we are able to kind of leapfrog ahead, and we're able to prevent some of that loss. But now there are techniques, speech to speech, which have been in open research and people are working on. I think Facebook kind of published a few results on this as well for a few languages. But the ability to take speech directly, which in our belief will be the technique that basically wins out as this field of AI dubbing and translation grows. I think Camb AI is in the position where we have discovered something extremely unique that we can do with kind of current state of the art to have very high accuracy and pretty good results. And as we develop more and more, us being a core AI research team, maybe if it's speech to speech next or God knows what next, we'll try to be in the areas that make sure that we have always state-of-the-art results in anything that we productionize. So yeah, right now I think I would call our technique a little bit of a hybrid of both. The kind of at the intersection, we're graduating to something like speech to speech in the future, which time will show if that is the right way to do things, and possibly it might be.
I want to take a quick break from the episode and say, if you're enjoying this content, the best way you can say thank you is to subscribe. So if you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. And if you're on one of the podcast platforms, hit the subscribe button there as well. And also share it out to your friends and colleagues. If you find this content useful and you think other people will enjoy it as well, please send it out. And back to the episode. So in the video, how do you deal with if it takes a different amount of time to say a sentence or to say a statement in one language versus another, and how do you deal with mouth movements and timing the body language up with the time that if I'm pointing to something saying over here, and then I'm making sure that when I say over here and point at the same time in the video, how do you deal with all that stuff?
That's a great question. So I think like I said, right, naively, if you were to think about speech to speech, text to text, text to speech, you would kill all of that, what you mentioned, right? How do you account for cross-lingual time sync, as we phrase it? Let's say, a sentence takes 10 seconds in English, takes shorter in Mandarin or another language. How do you compensate for that? So we've actually created proprietary algorithms to do and manage some of these artifacts. And it's not just cross-lingual time sync, but also things like background score preservation. We do exceedingly well on content like sports, which is very, very difficult to dub. I mean, half the time in sports, when the commentator is shouting and screaming, you can't understand what they're saying in English. So we're happy to have results that can demonstrate that we're able to dub that kind of context or that kind of content, which goes to show the level of contextual understanding. But in that case, you need things like background score preservation, because audience cheering, the game hype, all of that's important to preserve even in the other language, which most systems fail to do or don't do well. So, AI dubbing, people have looked at it as what's so hard in it? But it's exactly these minute things that you have to make absolutely perfect before it becomes anything near production quality. Things like lip movements, mouth movements, things like cross-lingual time sync, preserving background score, managing, multiple speakers. You have to take many, many things into account before you can build a system that's robust enough to serve even the easiest of use cases, like educational videos or corporate training videos. To do them really, really well, it's a holistic understanding of the problem, and you need to be able to spend a lot of time in it to be able to check off all those boxes that a customer would say, yes, this is something that I'd be happy to put out, and it wouldn't seem like a robot speaking, and it would actually make sense to my audience. They would be able to connect with it, and it would seem as realistic as possible for the price point that I have at the moment. I do think that over time, this is just an art form in a sense that will require more and more refining. As competitors come along, different people will be able to solve different facets of this problem better. I think eventually there will be enough research and development in this space that I can definitely see the future being localized with the help of AI completely, and us being able to scale information to everybody at a much more rapid rate than what's possible today with manual dubbing. So that's, I think, my 2 cents on it. That's some of the things that we definitely take care of. And it's all proprietary stuff that we have kind of built ourselves / built upon existing state of the art. So yeah.
Cool. I might have missed it when I asked you the question before, but did you say you're actually training your own models at this point, or are you piggybacking on top of existing OpenAI models, or Hugging Face models or something, or what's your strategy there?
Yeah, so like I said, it's you can kind of call it we have an ensemble technique end to end. Some of these utilize information and services from third-party APIs, but a large majority of it that solves for the fundamental problems of low resource, zero shot are our own models. I have my handy GPU on this side training 24/7. So yeah, we are training our own foundational models. We hope to make some of this available open source later in the year, and also some of these models available as developer APIs so that people can create, as I mentioned, the goal isn't to create like an AI dubbing tool, but really provide kind of a backbone for the internet to localize its content, which means that if we have models that really get the job done for some of these fundamental models, we think it's a great strategy and also a great opportunity for us to open source / release them as developer APIs for more people to build different types of localization tools or different kinds of AI dubbing tools for different use cases. So yeah, I think it's definitely a win-win there. And the goal is that, yeah, with our 2 models, maybe 3, we're able to make them as available as possible to the general public.
Cool. Are you guys using like a vector database, something like Pinecone for data storage, or how do you handle the storage of data?
Yeah, so right now we're just using GCP. We got some of their credits, so we're burning out through them. But yeah, eventually we would need to move to more mature data lakes and data warehouses. So that's further down the road, but I think we're surviving based on what we can get by as a startup at the moment.
Cool. What type of database do you store all this stuff in?
So a lot of the audio, video kind of data, we have to store just as file store, right? And kind of then there's data loaders, etc., that we have to do. But the raw data, you can kind of just think about at the moment, just pure file storage based at the moment. Nice.
Okay. And do you use like TensorFlow, or how are you actually, computing all this?
I think unanimously, a lot of the research community has said goodbye to TensorFlow. PyTorch is in. We use PyTorch. I think Facebook's been doing really well. Maybe not corporate-wise, but definitely open source. They've been doing really good research, open sourcing a lot of it. That's definitely pushing the boundary for a lot of people.
Why is that though? Why is PyTorch winning out over TensorFlow? I see TensorFlow, yeah, more on the corporate side, and I see PyTorch more on the academic side. But like, why PyTorch? And do you think PyTorch is the long-term winner, or what do you think about the two?
Yeah, I think performance, upkeep, open source push, that is always going to win out in the future. And that's, I think, what everybody is talking about. Even when you look at some of the other models, like even when you talk about something like OpenAI, which...
But TensorFlow is open source, right? I mean, OpenAI uses TensorFlow.
Right. But I think it more depends on how much activity someone has. So for example, if Facebook is the pioneer for PyTorch, and they're doing really kick-ass work in open source and doing a lot of good academic research, and they're open sourcing that, then that community will continue to grow. And I think this is a general principle for any AI system or framework over time. Like, I don't know if you recently saw Google's paper that they published. I think it was an internal leaked memo where they were saying neither we nor OpenAI has any moat, just pointing to how rapidly open source is growing and the power of open source. They described the entire timeline of when GPT came out, when models like Llama, Alpaca, etc. came out, to now things like, we're in Dubai right now, so TII just launched Falcon out of Abu Dhabi. So open source will always win, just because of the sheer volume of people and the expertise of so many people going into it. And I do feel that any framework that has a higher kind of open source push will win out in the long term.
So you're saying PyTorch is more open source than, I think TensorFlow, Google created that in their Google Brain or whatever lab back in 2010 or 2011, and they open sourced it in 2015, right?
Right. So there's a few frameworks now like PyTorch, TensorFlow, JAX. I think at the moment it's just given how open source has grown and given how academia has grown and given several factors on performance and such as well, PyTorch has just seen a rapid rise. And I do think that it's a lot because perhaps of Meta and Facebook, because of the work they've been doing. I mean, we really don't see a company that is as aggressive as publishing as they are. And with the kind of work they're doing more and more, it only makes sense that it's very explainable why people would want to choose PyTorch over something like TensorFlow. You really don't hear about the best, baddest models coming out in TensorFlow anymore.
Yeah, so it's interesting because when I think of AI, I think of like the leaders being OpenAI and Google. I don't think of Facebook as being in the lead, but it's from everything you're saying, it sounds like you're kind of leaning towards Facebook being in the lead. Like, talk to me about how Facebook's, like, how are they in the lead other than open sourcing PyTorch and, you know, doing some stuff open in the open source community? What are they like? What are they doing in their own products, and what are they doing to commercialize the use of this technology?
Yeah, that's a great question to talk about. So here's the cool thing, right? With open source, I think the general sentiment is iterations and mess ups are more allowable. Like, you can publish something open source that has a lot of bugs and is breaking and gets better over time. It can be good, but it won't be perfect. And there's a general understanding in the community that things will get better over time. But let's say if Meta productized the same thing, right? They'd be under fire, right? I mean, wow, this just doesn't work. It's crappy. Like, if you take the same kind of technology but try to productize it, they're going to be a lot under fire. But if you take the same thing and open source it, there's going to be a lot more relaxation, being like, wow, okay, they're really open sourcing their stuff. They're really contributing. They're being super nice about it. So I think Facebook, I don't know, I can't speak to their internal corporate strategy or anything, but I think where they're winning is definitely taking a lot of their research and fast tracking it, not through product, but fast tracking it through open source. And as they continue to do that, at least in academia and research, they will be the winners in at least attracting the kind of talent that they want for some of the serious specific stuff. I can give you an example. For Camb AI, it's very hard for me to go to a Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, or MIT, as counterintuitive it might be, me being from one of these schools and being like, I really want to find a kick-ass machine learning engineer who will just do it, right? The way I hired for Camb AI is actually open source, determining who's really working on speech, who's working on language, and seeing how much they're contributing to open source, how active they are, right? That's really the measure of how much, and of course, how much someone is publishing. That's really the measure of how good someone is, rather than, okay, a generic machine learning engineer from a top tier school, right? And so I think Meta would potentially win out in attracting very specific talent in the open source community for very specific kinds of research as they continue to open source. I think as per leaders, I think having the lead and leadership in AI is going to be a very, very kind of temporary existence of sorts. Like, right now, we know OpenAI is quote unquote the leader because of how hyped up ChatGPT is. But again, at the same time, if you see the timeline of progress in other types of LLMs that other people are kind of using, how people are using open source LLMs to fine tune on their own data sets and get even better performance, I see a world where the AI layer will become more and more democratized. And it's really more the product layer, or what kind of data you have and how much access you have to hardware, that will become a differentiator. And that's essentially what Google leaked in their internal memo, talking about how open source is eating them up. And in the long term, it's going to be very hard for them to keep up with development and in the AI space unless they start open sourcing more of their technology.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Google was the original pioneer of this. I mean, TensorFlow was like the OG, framework for AI, and they were the creators. Like, I think Google has been at the lead of this charge for a long time. And then you brought up that point about like how data, like I think you're right. I think the technology here, it's like everything, man, like operating systems, we have Linux, like the kernel, we have, all the packages, the package managers, the languages, the frameworks, all that stuff gets open sourced. Like only the very top layer, like the actual product itself gets commercialized, and everything else below the surface is all open source. I had Taylor Otwell on the show a few episodes ago. He's the creator of Laravel. And we were talking a lot about open source and kind of like the history. We talked about like Richard Stallman and like Linus Torvalds and some of the early pioneers of open source. And kind of like how all this stuff over time, like the systems, the packages, the frameworks, the languages all lean towards being open source. And that's like even like big companies like AWS and Google Cloud Platform, like these big cloud environments are all built on open source hypervisors and open source, operating systems and packages and all that stuff, networking protocols. So it's interesting. I do agree. I think all this stuff is going to continue to be more and more open source at the framework level, but I do think that the ways it's going to be commercialized is that people will build products that have deep rooted feature sets in AI capabilities. And then the other piece you touched on, which I love, is the models, the data. And I think that there will be a concept in the future of like a mass. Like we have SaaS, we have PaaS, we have all this stuff. I think we'll have mass models as a service where you can.
You're starting to see that as well. I think some of the leaders in the AI space who are creating their own foundational models, their strategy is to take a foundational model and either open source it or provide it as an API, very much like we want to do with our foundational models, which is the right strategy in the long term for us as a business, more both from an adoption standpoint and attracting great talent, right? And one of the things that when we talk about product also is very important. So I think naively, when somebody from corporate who does not have the understanding of perhaps the exact understanding of how important open source is, for them it looks like, oh, wow, okay, open source means that if I open source my technology, I'm giving it away. I'm not going to have any moat. Tomorrow, anybody's going to be able to do this, right? And that might not be true for big tech, of course, but for any other company, that might just be the more traditional way to think about it. Like, why would I give away my technology for free? But the interesting, on the flip side there is, it is very, very hard to productionize just an open source model, right? Sure, you can develop on it. It might be easy to do some early experimentation on it. But as we talked about, let's say, we open sourced our foundational models. They would provide great APIs and great kind of systems to do language translation, etc. But being able to create an end-to-end AI dubbing system like Camb AI requires a lot of knowledge of also productionizing the system and also handling all of these edge cases that actually make it a product, like cross-lingual time sync, background score preservation, multiple speakers. So I think it's kind of like a two-sided sword. Open source gives you like a little bit of a cheese for everybody to come around and see and gather around. But at the end of the day, yes, and it does grow from that. But at the end of the day, only when you have the technical know-how to actually productionize this, only when you have customer understanding, only when you have product understanding, will you be able to make these models and this technology useful, which I think is a big part that people miss out or don't factor in when they're thinking about open source and taking it and building a business.
There's all sorts of interesting ways to open source stuff. Like I know a guy here in Philly, Jake Stein. He has a new startup. He's done like a few big startups. You might know RJ Metrics, which sold to Magento, which is now Adobe. And then there's another one, Stitch Data, which spun out of RJ Metrics, and that sold to a private equity, I think, in London. Both of those were his company. So Stitch did are you familiar with Stitch?
No, I'm not.
It's like an ETL platform. So you can do automate your ETL layer stuff, like for, data warehousing. So you can pull in data from like, your ERPs and your, e-commerce platforms and your marketing, HubSpot, like all your different platforms. They have like, a few hundred integrations. And the platform itself, like the kind of like the compute layer, sort of like the GCP or the AWS part of it in the data store, they sold that as a SaaS. but the actual integrations themselves, like the actual individual ETL integrations, they open sourced all of it and let the community help them maintain it. So they obviously did a lot of work on maintaining all the integrations, but then the community also helped maintain the integrations. Then they get like donations and stuff like that to continue maintaining it. They sold that company. His new company, Common Paper, is doing the same thing, but in the legal niche, where sort of like what AngelList did with open sourcing the they kind of like codified the special purpose vehicle and the like the fund management with kind of, you know, like instead of doing all this manual paperwork, they just kind of sort of like programmatically did what you need to do to spin up a fund and get LPs and have a GP manage the fund and then deploy the funds to startups. Like they did all that in a tech platform. That's what Common Paper is doing now for like legal contracts, like NDAs and, you know, operating agreements and like, you know, master services agreements and all this stuff. So they have a team of all these lawyers that are coming in and like advising on what the open source languages should be. And they're basically trying to recreate the standards for contracts and then codifying it into a platform, which they're selling. What they're going to be selling is the e-signature platform. So it'll compete with like DocuSign or PandaDocs or something. But, you know, DocuSign and PandaDocs are just the e-signature platform. You still need to bring your own contracts and have your own lawyer.
That's smart.
Whereas this will be like, all right, sign up for the platform. We do the e-signature, but now also like we're going to be the lawyer for you. Like essentially, like we're going to create the standards for contracts. So now all you need to do is just say, all right, I want an NDA. And then it'll just be like an interface where it says like, all right, you know, it'll ask you questions like, do you need this? Do you need that? Do you need this? And then you just kind of hit the answers and then it just gives you the contract. Like the finished piece of the contract is filled in. It's all codified right into the platform. And so that's like that kind of stuff, you know, you're not going to like if you want to build that into your platform and not have it be open source, you have to go hire a whole team of lawyers that have all these different niche specialties and, you know, who knows how the hell much that's going to cost. But by open sourcing it, you kind of like you're inviting people to come into this, like all these lawyers to come into this advisory council that sort of oversees like the future of contracts. And also you're kind of creating this standard. Like by doing this, you can create the standard, like how Linux has created the standard for open source operating systems and everything that is built on top of Linux and all the different flavors and packages and frameworks and everything that has come on top of Linux. Linux has kind of created the standard now for like operating systems. Whereas like, you know, I guess this is what Jake's trying to do with contracts and creating the standard for what contracts should be in the future. And then the platform to, you know, execute them. So, I love the idea. Like it's not like intuitive, especially to like an old school business person. Like open source isn't intuitive necessarily, just like off the shelf. But you know, if it's used properly, there's so many like excellent use cases for open source. And you know, we wouldn't like our life wouldn't be what it is without open source. Like this, just like society. You know, everything as we know it today is so fundamentally rooted in open source. Like just even like things as simple as watching TV or like paying for your parking at a parking lot or like, you know, everything is built on open source. Satellites, you know, putting rockets into space, like everything has open source technology in it.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I think, you know, it's interesting to see what the future of talent and hiring will be as well through open source, which is something I always think about as more of these traditional places where a traditional company would go and hire. How is that going to change over time when the people who are actually doing stuff actually exist in the open source community? And that's, as we're scaling Camb AI, that's one of the problems, or kind of like more of the ethos questions that we have. Should we go to the Stanfords or Carnegie Mellons and hire a fresh grad, or should we hire somebody out of maybe a place nobody has heard about, but has been making 20 pull requests to this repo that we use every day, right?
That's a smart strategy.
Yeah,
I think that's really smart.
Yeah. It's like Moneyball. So that's what we think has paid off, and we've built a really, really sharp team in just kind of looking for hidden gems in the open source community.
That's cool. How old are you, man, by the way?
I turned 25 a few months ago.
This is so cool, man. I'm wondering like if this interview would be like if I interviewed Larry Page and Sergey Brin in like 1997.
Oh well, I mean,
you're doing some cool shit.
That,
that's for sure.
You say that, but just a quick aside, my past company, we actually what we built was Slingshot Ahead, and it was a Techstars funded company, and the goal was to basically scout the LeBrons of tech. So I grew up as this CS nerd wanting to code and build stuff. And there was never like an FC Barcelona camp that I could go to, or there was never like kind of like I could never do anything with it, if you know what I mean, right? There was not a structured program that could really accelerate me to be what Messi was at 14, 15, right? And I've always wondered when I was growing up, why wasn't that? Like I saw a lot of my friends become like these superstar singers, or they went into these cricket leagues when I was growing up in India. And so that's what I wanted to create, but for tech. And we found these 16, 17-year-olds from like the remotest parts of the world who now work at like YC companies and even have YC companies of their own, basically creating like sports scouting, but for tech prodigy. So I've been kind of desensitized to the fact when I see a 12-year-old and he's like, yeah, I'm using GPT-4 to, make like $1 million every 2 months. The whole societal shift is going towards younger and younger people who have now grown up in a world where, maybe in the past decade, as easy as it was to pick up a soccer ball and start playing with it, now we're in an age where like kids are picking up computers and coding, right? And so, yeah.
I mean, there's definitely signals for that sort of thing. I mean, if you go back and you look at like, if you read the biography of Bill Gates or Zuckerberg or like Elon Musk, like there was clearly signals that they were going to be like, mega tech influencers and mega like business creators in the future.
Right. And my theory back then was just like, we're trying so hard to really find who might be the next Ronaldo, who might be the next Messi, which has its place in society. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like sports is amazing. It's like has a place in our society. And that's all great. But at the same time, we should be equally curious who might be the next Elon Musk. And we should be as aggressive as hunting for that person or that person, like as we are for finding the next music superstar or sports superstar in these like early years. And I've seen that like now there's so many platforms popping up for like teenage founders or young founders. And I'm generally, because I'm still associated with such communities, I see it more and more. But I definitely see younger and younger people coming into entrepreneurship quicker and quicker, and tech entrepreneurship as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's kids still in high school doing pretty cool shit, man. I mean, even here in Philly, I'm a volunteer at this place called Hopeworks in Philly. Actually, I think the last 2 episodes ago was Dan Roden, who's the CEO of Hopeworks. And basically it's like, pulling kids out of really underserved neighborhoods and communities of Philadelphia and the suburbs of Philly, like in Camden, New Jersey, where it's like extreme poverty and just a lot of like, generations of trauma in the people living there. And I've like, there's this one kid that I'm working with right now, like helping him out with his business, and he's still in high school. He's literally like buying vending machines and putting them all over Philadelphia, and he's like making money already. I'm like, dude, this is so awesome that like, the kids in high school, like, young adults, I guess you call him, I think he's 18, but I guess it's so awesome that like young adults are out there doing shit like that, man, like in high school still.
Yeah, and I think I really want to stay close to whatever business I build, either in the past, present, or future. I strongly believe that I want to remain very close to accessibility, because it's just a great kick when you're able to find like the best people in places that nobody else is looking, right? Whether that's through access or just raw talent. And that just gives me a kick. Slingshot had the very same theme. I think Camb AI has a very similar theme. Whatever I do next will likely have the same kind of theme, just because of what that motivates me to do and feel.
Cool. So what happened with Slingshot? Did you sell the company or?
Yeah. So over time, me being a pure technologist, it became more of an HR business, so to say, very heavy on ops. And I was a comp sci grad out of Carnegie Mellon, right? So I learned a lot of stuff through Slingshot, business management, product development, things that I never learned in school. And we did quite well with it. But over time, it made sense for us to kind of give it in the hands of somebody who was more experienced with real like ops and HR and all that stuff. So we exited out a pretty small exit. And that's when I kind of started my journey with Camb AI. Slingshot's community is still open, and I remain part of it, continue to remain part of it. But yeah, that's what we did with that.
That's cool. And yeah, I have your LinkedIn pulled up, man. You have like a pretty epic history. Like obviously you've mentioned Carnegie Mellon. That was your university you went to. You were like interning at Brown University, and you interned at Intuit and Microsoft, and you did something at Techstars. I'm not sure what that was. Touch on that a little bit. And then you're an ML AI engineer at Apple working on Siri. I want to touch on Apple and Siri a little bit because Apple seems to be like behind the curve with like AI, and I want to learn from you a little bit more why you think that. I think we talked about that a little bit the other day. But yeah, impressive background. You've done a lot in the last decade or so.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think where it all started was when I was growing up in India, like I mentioned. I saw a lot of people excelling at different things that I didn't want to do, nor I was good at. I was good at programming stuff, but not a lot of people around me really knew about it or cared enough about it. And so the only way I could learn and get better was through the internet. And that's just how I built everything. That's how I found opportunities, even very earlier on. And I think it was just a blessing in disguise that put in the hustle in me from earlier on, where I was like, if I see something online, I need to try it out. It's a hackathon. It's an internship. I'm going to DM as many people as possible. I'm just going to keep trying. And it was, I guess, like a life-changing moment for me when I got into Carnegie Mellon as an international student. I think like 5 or 6 people from the country got in, and I was one of them. And I think from there, my entire life changed. Like, I went to CMU. I met these awesome professors, some of which are have really created the bare bones of what computer science is and machine learning is. Then I did all these like internships, and I started working at Apple. Apple was my first job out of Carnegie Mellon, and I joined Apple specifically actually for that reason, because I believe that Apple is a kind of company that is behind the curve, and I wanted to be part of something that I could really grow in quickly. And so when I interviewed and I got into a team within Siri, their AI ML group, I was really hyped because from my perspective, I was joining a team that was trying to ride the upward curve in AI ML. I looked at, like you mentioned, like Google and Facebook right at kind of the top, and where a person like me would be, I guess, yes, one of many still at Apple, but one of many, 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 many more at Google and Facebook and stuff. Apple, traditionally being a hardware company, was just coming into AI and has just been coming into AI ever since they started with Siri and later on. So I wanted to be part of something that was just growing and about to grow. And I spent time there. Unfortunately, I decided to leave after a bit, although I think I had a lot of fun working there. From what I think it goes back to the same point that we were discussing of what has Apple behind the curve. I think there's really 2 reasons. One, it might seem that they're behind the curve when they're not really. And they might be working on some really cool shit that even I as an employee wouldn't know about, or 500 people working there wouldn't know about. They are very closed doors about the technology they create, and for good reason. I think Apple has been a pioneer in technology for a long time, but it's definitely, from an AI perspective, not as public as it could be. And I don't think it will ever be, which is why, going back to that same argument, I think the more closed you are in the AI age, the more definitely at least perception of you being behind will be more and more. And that will become a reality if it's a perception for long enough.
Interesting.
I do think,
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, Apple is definitely, they've always historically been super secretive.
yeah,
And interesting. So the perception that they are behind, even if they're technically not behind, the perception of the public that they're behind, you're saying, will lead to them actually being behind just because people don't believe they're ahead.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, let's think about some of the best college graduates who are vying for the top companies. I mean, 4 out of 5 times they might be at the Google and the OpenAI. They'd have a preference for the OpenAI and Google rather than the Apple, just because of the public perception or how these companies are demonstrating their technology. But I think Apple might not necessarily need to win in the AI sphere, or from a even business strategy. I mean, they have a ton of other cool stuff that they can very easily win on. We're going to see what happens very soon with their next conferences and their next announcements. But some of the technology that people have been talking about potentially in VR, AR could be laying the foundations of whatever that kind of world will continue to grow. Metaverse was, I think, it's still, I guess, a huge deal. Everybody was talking about it, not so much right now, but it is definitely going to be one of the other things alongside AI that is going to continue to grow. And it's quite possible that they want to exist in that sphere and, just maintain what they're good at, or what the public thinks they're good at, which is hardware and creating awesome, like, stuff that you can really hold in your hand or experience, right? And yeah, I mean, over time, like, sure, they will still have amazing AI engineers, amazing research, which can more trickle into their hardware offerings or their devices or anything that they build. And they might not necessarily even need to win in the kind of AI wars.
Interesting. Yeah. So I was listening to the Acquired podcast, the episode about Amazon Web Services the other day. Is this follow-up to the Amazon.com episode they did. Check it out, all the listeners, if you haven't listened to that podcast and that episode. Great episode. Jeff Bezos is like a beast, but I digress. One of the things they were talking about was that, Amazon obviously innovated the cloud space with AWS, and then Google and Microsoft followed. And, in the order of market share, you have Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and the cloud market space. And then the rest is like 5 or 10%. That's like everything else, like DigitalOcean and Linode and all the other players out there. But why, so Facebook kind of has a couple things. They have like a platform as a service. I forget if they still support that or not, but, Facebook has a little bit of stuff. They've innovated a little bit in their own, cloud computing for internal use. But like one of the things they talked about in the episode was why Apple hasn't done anything in the cloud space. And they kind of postulated that, Apple is very much a hardware company, and they're very much a consumer sales company. Like, they don't understand enterprise sales. They've never done enterprise sales. Even like if you try to, and I've experienced this myself because I buy a lot of Apple hardware for my employees at Curotech. Mm-hmm. And it's like, basically when you try to call up Apple to like purchase a large order, they're just like, oh yeah, just like go into the store and just buy, just have like 10 or 20 MacBook Pros shipped to this store and, King of Prussia, Pennsylvania, and just go pick them up. Like, they don't really have like enterprise sales. So it's interesting that, Apple just like, they're still very much like a consumer product company, almost like, they're like a luxury consumer goods company, like, something like like Porsche or like Louis Vuitton or something like that. Like they kind of operate like those types of businesses.
Sure.
And even their stores, if you go to the mall, their stores are right next to like the Tesla store or the Louis Vuitton store or whatever. Like they're always in the same part of the mall too.
Right. And I mean, I think as much as they have established themselves as a premier brand or premium brand, I think over time, if they remain a hardware / consumer company, they will probably go down lower market to be more accessible to people who have been using the Androids of the world. I don't know if you've heard Elon Musk trying to launch his own kind of phone that'll apparently compete with the Apple phone, but will be way cheaper or something. But I think if they
Really?
remain in this space, yeah, I think that I heard, maybe it's fake news, who knows these days, but I think they were talking about him and Samsung doing something and him launching like a Tesla phone or something like that.
Well, this is interesting. So I'm checking like what are obviously Apple's been like the largest company in the world, so they're doing something right. They've been the largest company in the world for a while now. They have like hundreds of billions of dollars in reserves. They're $2.65 trillion market cap.
Mm-hmm.
Freaking insane, man. I don't know how you ever grow into that valuation, but holy shit.
Yeah, I know. So, I think somebody would have to remain the Apple of the world, right? If that makes sense. As Google and OpenAI, Microsoft all push towards cloud and AI, you'll need to have somebody who's the hardware device king of the world. Yeah. And that might continue to just be Apple, whether that's phones, laptops, VR headsets, or whatever else we see in the future.
Dude, check out this list, man. It's from Investopedia. Apple, number one, largest company in the world, $2.65 trillion market cap. You're in Dubai right now. Saudi Aramco, number two, $2.33 trillion market cap, second largest company in the world. Number three is Microsoft, $2.1 trillion market cap, third largest company in the world. Number four is Google, Alphabet, $1.54 trillion. Five is Amazon, $1.42 trillion. Six is Tesla, measly 910 billion. Seven, Berkshire Hathaway, 644 billion. Eight is Nvidia. I think they're going to come out of the woodwork here and become a massive player in the future because they're leading the hardware space for AI. But they're 457 billion right now. I bet you they'll pass $1 trillion this year or next year.
100%.
Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, number 9, they're 456 billion. Number 10, Meta at 449 billion. So super interesting, man. Like the top 10 companies in the world, there's like one oil company and like one, Berkshire Hathaway, they're like an investment company, but they own a bunch of companies. They own a lot of Apple. I think they own, 10% of their portfolio is Apple. So that's probably why they're even on this list. But this list is like all tech companies, largest companies in the world.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are pretty new. I mean, Apple's old, Microsoft is old, but like Google, like they came out in 96 or 98. Amazon came out in 96. Tesla came out in 2010 or 2008.
Yeah.
Meta, yeah, they came out in 2004. So like a lot of the companies on this list are like around 20 years old or less. So it's crazy.
Right.
Crazy.
Yeah. We might see a very different list very quickly. Because I think, like you touched upon with NVIDIA, as the AI layer software, all of that becomes open source and more democratized. It will be about who has data, who can productionize stuff, and who has access to hardware. That's going to be, I think I see that being the next oil, if that makes sense.
Yeah, NVIDIA, they're on like a stock price burn right now with, they just like crushed their earnings reports last quarter, and it's because everyone's trying to, there's like a line out the door to buy these freaking GPUs so people can train their models. Sure, you got yours. You're training yours right now.
Yeah. I think that's going to be the big next play. That's going to be the bottleneck, and that's what NVIDIA is going to win at.
Yeah, cool. What didn't I touch on? There's something else I wanted to ask you. I love what you're doing, man. I think you're going to really like take off with everything you're working on. Obviously, like you're clearly brilliant. I can tell you're a hustler. How many hours do you work per day? Like how many or per week? Like what's like your week look like in terms of working?
I don't know. I mean, I think I try to remain very structured with my life because I know that if you do go too overboard, you're not going to get work done anyway. You're going to start becoming lazy. You never want to be in the place where you start disliking the love of your life kind of thing, something that you put your blood, sweat, and tears into. So the way I try to organize my time is just, if I have like 100 things to do every week, I will just literally, instead of having like a task management system, I will just block out times on my calendar to get that done. And I am like a robot of my calendar, but it does keep me very organized. And surprisingly, it does give me enough time to sleep, eat, and do whatever else I want to do.
So you work like 40 hours, 60 hours, 80 hours?
I would say it's between the 60 to 80 range. So it's not like very, very crazy.
You're not sleeping on a dog bed under your desk like Elon Musk?
Not yet. Not yet. I think maybe soon. As we continue to scale, hopefully, we have the opportunity to do that.
That's cool. All right. One last thing I wanted to touch on. It just came back to me. So you're in Dubai right now. You mentioned that earlier. Just raised your seed round. Do you want to talk at all about that? Like what's next for Camb AI? I don't know if you want to share any metrics on your seed round. Super interested to hear about, you talked a lot about like the sovereign wealth fund in the Middle East. And there's a lot of money pumping into startups and AI tech. Would love to just hear about that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, 100%. I think picking back on one of the points that we mentioned about democratized access to AI and such, I think while Silicon Valley is going to remain Silicon Valley for a long time, there's many, many other regions of the world that are growing very quickly in AI and the adoption for it. The Middle East, and particularly Dubai and UAE, happens to be one of them. I mean, literally, we're talking about the best open source large language model coming out of Abu Dhabi, out of like a research institute that nobody heard of. It just goes to show like the seriousness and like the amount of kind of funding and effort that is going towards AI in this region. I was actually at NVIDIA's conference in Dubai very recently, and they were talking about the need and the value of the Middle East and their growth in AI, especially with the kind of capital they have and the resources they have. So yeah, we are based out of Dubai. We're a US Delaware C Corp, but we have technically an office in US and Dubai. It gives us a very nice kind of play with talent, because literally Middle East is 4 hours away from everywhere else, most parts of the world here. So that's why we've been able to effectively build a remote team. And find these hidden gems, like I mentioned. As for Camb AI, as we've been building our technology, we've had a very unique opportunity to work with some of the largest names across the globe, in Canada, North America, generally, Middle East and India. We are kind of working with both enterprises and individual creators at the moment, and we just raised our kind of seed round that's closing up, $4 million seed round. We're close.
It's a pretty good seed round.
Yeah, pretty decent. I think this gives us a good runway and good opportunity to bring on board some very, very serious talent, have the right hardware and infrastructure in place to realize our dream of becoming the localization.
When did you close that seed round?
So we're still in process of closing it. We're around 80 to 90% committed. So we're still closing it up, but we have commitments from some pretty big names that I can't fully mention right now. But hopefully soon enough you'll be able to see us and cheer for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to have you back on the show maybe like a year from now, just to kind of check in and see where you're at. I don't know.
love to.
Maybe I won't be able to get a slice of your time, and
No,
you'll
don't
be
say that.
you'll be sleeping on the dog bed at that point.
unless I'm asleep, yes.
That's so cool, man. I love everything you're doing. Super
so much.
exciting stuff here. I'm really excited for this episode to come out.
Thank you for having me on, Brian. Thanks.
Yeah, is there anything else you want to close on before we shut this down?
No, I think that's it. I've been watching your podcast. It's just a very humbling and very unique experience to also be on one. So just thank you for the opportunity, and to everybody who's listening. I think we're moving into a very, very exciting time of everybody's lives in AI. And I think whoever is like, thinking about AI, just know it's a great time to put yourself in this space. I think what I've been reading and hearing more and more is that AI is not going to replace anybody, but people who know AI, understand it, or are able to work with it effectively are going to be the leaders of the future. And I just do encourage people to learn as much as they can, be on podcasts like these and kind of other places where they can learn everything and anything about how this world is shaping up.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. Ack, thank you so much for coming on, man. That's the episode.
Cash flow? Did you clear your cash flow?